I've always loved camping. The quiet of the woods, the crackling of a fire, the feeling of being completely removed from the world. It always felt peaceful. But after what happened last summer, I don't think I'll ever go camping again. My friend Mark and I decided to camp out in a remote part of the forest near his family's cabin. We'd been there before, but this time we wanted to go deeper into the woods, far from any trails. We found a clearing just before sunset, set up our tent, and got a fire going. The first few hours were perfect, drinking a few beers, telling stories, listening to the sounds of the forest around us. But then, sometime around midnight, I noticed something strange. The forest had gone silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just the sound of the fire crackling. Mark must have noticed it too, because he stopped mid-sentence and glanced around. "Weird," he muttered, tossing another log onto the fire. That's when we heard it, a snap of a twig. Not the kind of snap from a small animal, but something heavy, something deliberate. It came from the trees behind us, just beyond the reach of our firelight. We both turned, staring into the darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it in the direction of the noise. The beam cut through the trees, but there was nothing there. "Probably a deer," Mark said, but his voice wasn't convincing. I wanted to agree, but my gut told me otherwise. The sound was too close, too precise, like something was watching us. We tried to shake it off, but the unease lingered. About 20 minutes later, just as we were starting to relax again, we heard another sound. This time, it was a whisper, low, indistinct, just at the edge of hearing. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart pounding. Mark just nodded, his face pale. We both sat frozen, listening. Then, from the darkness, we heard it again, closer. It wasn't just a whisper, it was mimicking us. "Did you hear that?" The voice was wrong, like someone was trying to copy my words, but didn't quite understand how human speech worked. The pitch was slightly off, the cadence unnatural. Mark shot to his feet, grabbing the hatchet we'd brought for firewood. My hands were shaking as I gripped my flashlight tighter. "Who's out there?" Mark called. Silence. Then, just beyond the fire's glow, something moved. A shape, tall and thin, almost impossibly so. It was just standing there, partially obscured by the trees. I could barely make it out, but what I saw made my stomach drop. It didn't look right. It was too long, its limbs slightly too stretched, and worst of all, it had no face. I don't mean it was hidden. I mean there was nothing there, just smooth, featureless skin where its face should have been. Then it took a step toward us. We ran. We didn't bother packing up, didn't look back. We sprinted through the woods, barely able to see where we were going. Behind us, we could hear it moving. Not running, just walking. But somehow, it was keeping up. I don't know how long we ran, but we eventually saw the faint glow of Mark's cabin in the distance. We didn't stop until we were inside, slamming the door shut behind us. We locked everything, windows, doors, then sat there gripping our knees trying to catch our breath. For a while, nothing happened. Then, just when I started convincing myself we were safe, a tap on the window, slow, rhythmic, almost like it was mocking us. Mark and I didn't move. We didn't breathe. We just sat there staring at the window. The curtains were drawn, but we knew it was there. Then, did you hear that? The same distorted, unnatural voice from before. It was right outside the window. We stayed like that until dawn, never daring to look outside. When the sun finally rose, we grabbed our keys, jumped into the truck, and sped away. We haven't been back since. We left everything behind, our tent, our supplies, but I don't care. Because sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear that whisper. Did you hear that? I've always loved camping. The solitude, the crackling fire, the sense of adventure. There was nothing quite like it. So when my friends bailed on our weekend trip, I decided to go alone. I had camped by myself before, but something about this trip felt off. I chose a spot deep in the woods, far from the usual campsites. I wanted peace, a break from everything. By late afternoon, I had my tent pitched and a fire going. As the sun dipped below the trees, an eerie stillness settled over the forest. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. I brushed it off, telling myself it was normal. But then, around midnight, I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, almost like wind passing through the trees. But there was something deliberate about it. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But then I heard it again, closer. I turned off my lantern and strained to listen. The whispering didn't stop. It seemed to be circling my campsite, moving through the trees. My skin prickled as I realized the voice wasn't carried by the wind. It was something else entirely. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it through the trees. Nothing, just the empty woods. Then, just as I was about to retreat into my tent, I heard my name. A breathy, elongated whisper. Daniel. My stomach twisted into knots. No one knew I was out here. No one should have been anywhere near my campsite. I turned in a slow circle, my flashlight trembling in my hand. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, and then I saw it. Just beyond the trees, barely visible in the dark, was a figure. It stood still, its posture unnatural, its head tilted too far to the side, as if listening. My light barely reached it, but I could make out the shape, thin, too thin, with arms that hung limply at its sides. It whispered my name again. Daniel, come here. My legs refused to move. I wanted to run, to scream, but I felt frozen in place. Then, in the faint glow of my flashlight, I saw it twitch. A shuddering, jerking motion, like a puppet on tangled strings. That broke me. I bolted for my tent, yanking my knife from my pack. I zipped myself inside and gripped the blade so tightly my fingers ached. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling my tent. I bit down on my lip to keep from making a sound. My mind raced through every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. I was miles from the nearest road. Who, or what, could be out here? The whispering started again, this time directly outside my tent. Daniel, let me in. I held my breath. The fabric of the tent shifted. Something pressed against it. I snapped. With a burst of adrenaline, I slashed my knife at the spot where the figure stood. The blade tore through the thin nylon, but there was nothing there. No shadow, no footsteps retreating. Just silence. I didn't sleep. I sat there, knife in hand, until the first light of dawn. As soon as the sun crept through the trees, I packed up my things, not caring how messy it was. I just wanted to leave. As I reached my car, I glanced back at the forest one last time. And that's when I saw them. More figures, standing among the trees, still, watching, whispering. I don't camp alone anymore. I've always loved camping. The solitude, the quiet hum of nature, the feeling of being completely disconnected from the world. It was my escape. I used to go solo camping, at least a few times a year, just me, my tent, and the vastness of the wilderness. But after what happened last fall, I don't think I'll ever go back. It was late October, perfect time to camp without the usual summer crowds. I had driven up to a remote site deep in the woods of northern Montana. No designated campsites, no park rangers, just endless trees and silence. Exactly what I was looking for. I set up my tent near a small clearing and gathered enough firewood to last the night. As the sun set, I cooked a simple meal over the fire, sipping on a cheap beer while listening to the distant sounds of owls and rustling leaves. It was peaceful until it wasn't. Around midnight, I heard something. At first, it was faint, a soft crunch of leaves, like a deer moving through the trees. But then it became more distinct. Heavy footsteps, deliberate, slow. Not an animal. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped just beyond the reach of my fire's glow. I could feel eyes on me, watching. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the trees, but there was nothing there. Just darkness. Probably just my imagination, I muttered to myself, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. But I couldn't ignore the fact that it sounded like someone had been walking toward my camp, and then just stopped. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound, every whisper of wind through the trees made my skin crawl. But eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted into a light sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with a jolt. The footsteps were back. They were closer this time, circling my tent. My heart pounded so hard I thought whoever was out there could hear it. I reached for the hunting knife I kept beside me and held it tight, my breath shallow and controlled. Then, the most horrifying thing happened. The footsteps stopped, right outside my tent. And then, a voice, not a normal voice, a whisper, raspy and unnatural. "I see you." My blood ran cold. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, clutching my knife, waiting. The seconds felt like hours. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then suddenly, the tent fabric moved. Someone, ran their hand along the side of it, slow and deliberate. I snapped. I grabbed my flashlight and burst out of the tent, knife in hand, ready to fight for my life. But there was no one there. Fire had burned down to embers, casting long, eerie shadows. The trees swayed gently in the night breeze, but no sign of anyone. No footprints, no movement, nothing. I stood there, heart hammering, scanning the trees for any sign of the intruder. But the woods were still, too still. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat by the dying fire, knife in my lap, waiting for the first light of dawn. As soon as the sun broke the horizon, I packed up and got the hell out of there. But before I left, I saw something that still haunts me to this day. On the tree closest to my tent, there was something carved into the bark. A single sentence, deep and jagged, like it had been scratched in with a knife. "See you soon." I never went back, and I never will.